I will pass back over to Dimple, but thank you.
Thank you so much, Emma. I think we're going to now move on to sort of a Q&A, and I think there's some burning questions, I'm sure, that have kind of, have been set up, because I think those are some of the questions that we get asked on a daily basis. So I think, Tish, over to you to kind of raise those questions, and then Emma and myself will, aim to answer as best as possible. But thank you very much. That was great, Emma. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. So thank you so much again. Just acknowledging Dimple, who is our founder and CEO here at PurpleBeard and doing a wonderful, wonderful job. And Emma, who is a program manager at Breakable. Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge with us. So we have a couple of really good questions, and I'm just going to pull them into the screen so I don't look like I'm looking away. What do you think are the biggest challenges faced by employers in taking on apprentices?
Emma, do you want to go first?
Sure. Yeah, as part of my role is speaking to specifically smaller employers, but employers about apprenticeships from a very early stage, kind of on an everyday basis almost. So, I mean, to be brutally honest, the main factor that's stopping people from taking on an apprentice is whether they can afford the full-time wages or not, not just as the kind of key cornerstone. If they're looking to hire a new apprentice, that is, obviously if they're upskilling current staff, that's not a concern because they're already being paid. But that is the main thing. We've got to make sure that those wages are affordable, because you don't want to start the learner on something that's unsustainable. So you need to have a look at how long the apprenticeship course is. We obviously want to recommend that they keep that person on after the course is finished and offer them promotion as well, and development within the business. So that's the real kind of key thing to make sure is in place first. But aside from that, the other kind of challenges people face is having the right people in place. So I work with some very micro businesses that might just be like 2 to 5 people in total. And as you can imagine, people are like director, kind of delivery manager, program manager, they are HR, they are accountant. They're doing lots of things to make sure that business keeps running. And so that can be a little bit challenging sometimes, where it'd be great to have like someone in charge of just HR that can onboard people effectively and kind of think about all the like any kind of policies they want in place to support that learner. So that is a bit of a challenge, but it doesn't mean it's not possible. Definitely wouldn't recommend not taking it on if you don't have a HR person. It's absolutely fine. That's kind of why WorkWhile exists. We try and give that additional support on the admin and the preparation, and try and make sure that everything's in place to ensure success. So those are a couple. I'm sure Dimple's got a few to add as well.
I think just to echo what you're saying, I think there is, for SMEs, they're very different challenges rather from large organizations. And I think if you're talking about SMEs and the focus is on that, I think some of the, key issues we hear about is, yes, very small team. They're worried about the support for a young apprentice, or for an apprentice. Then again, the financial responsibility, because, if it's a 2-year standard, for example, the apprentice has got to have a job for over 2 years, really, because you're looking at the endpoint assessment period and all of that. And I think the other thing I hear a lot about is the bureaucracy. So because it is a funded program, and the amount of paperwork, the sheer volume of paperwork that they've got to complete, and the agreements and all of those things, because that's what the DFE is expecting. That's what Ofsted is expecting. So I think that's where they kind of almost get a bit put off. Then I think recently I've had employers who've come to me and walked away from a standard because they wanted to train existing staff, but the duration has, because some of the standards we offer are 2 years because they're at a level 5, and they've said it's too long, because they start looking at the 6 hours per week, the off the job, and they say, oh, well, then this person will be off for 44 days. They kind of calculate that, but we have to pay for this time. So those are some of the things it's kind of, I'm getting a lot of that feedback, especially from a sort of sales perspective, but that I think apprenticeships are really, really key because they do drive the economy. And you gave a whole range of reasons around ESG, CSR, but also just around how we develop the next generation of talent. So it's how do we try and bridge the gap, because government expects something, employers have a slightly different, they want it slightly easier, the process. And I think WorkWhile, I think you guys play a very important role, because in some ways you're bridging that gap where you're sort of working with managers to support their apprentices via the developmental program, but also how you can help with the levy transfer. But I think the government perhaps needs to look at this a little bit further, and how do you make it slightly easier and more receptive for SMEs, the 2 to 5 organizations, because that's where there's the greatest need. So I think that's all for me. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Emma. Thank you, Dimple. And Dimple, while you have the spotlight, how do you think a training provider like PurpleBeard can better support employers in overcoming some of these challenges?
I think so, we are doing a lot of it, but I think we need, it's continuing building, but I think it's important to have the dialogue with employers. It's two sides of the coin, right? So, where we're offering pastoral support, where we're offering the one-to-one like updates every month. So that's one of the things we offer as a provider. So every month we send out a report, we speak to our employers, we understand what the challenges are, and we take on board that feedback. And I think that needs to continue. So for example, a few months ago, the feedback we had from some of our employers was, we really want to have a toolkit that we can understand what are the different assessment methods. So what is expected in terms of a work product, witness testimony from this apprentice as part of this standard, so we can ensure that it forms part of what they're doing, or it's holistic, right? Because when we say, oh, give us a witness testimony, a line manager might not really know what a witness testimony is or why it's needed. But I think when you start putting on those packs together and giving it to them, then they kind of become more part of the process. And I think it's to continue that engagement. I recognize, I think, that sometimes employers don't have that much time to give. So how do we make it easy, make it seamless, make it almost digestible, so that they can, really kind of take on apprentices. I think, and it's, training providers, we play a very important role alongside organizations like WorkWhile, because I think it's a partnership, it's a collaboration, because it's a pastoral support to the employer, and kind of creating that mindset almost, and saying, apprentices are good for your business, but it's good for the economy. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much. And just to the both of you as well, are there any specific areas where you feel more guidance or more resources are needed to facilitate the integration of apprentices into the workplace?
I think it's a very good question. It's something that we've definitely tried to kind of cover in the work that we do, but there wasn't a lot out there. So that's kind of part of the reason we started creating. We've got these kind of step-by-step guides for different parts of getting ready for having apprentices, and making sure you're picking the right standard, making sure you're picking the right training provider, etc. And that's that kind of the employer being ready part. And then there's kind of the provider part as well, where I'm sure PurpleBeard have got lots already, but making it digestible for them in terms of what the training plan is, like what is involved in the endpoint assessment. I think the kind of line managers, apprentices, and anyone else kind of involved, even understanding very early on what's required at the end in terms of what they need to be collecting and preparing for in terms of endpoint assessment is really key. But yeah, we've created, so as a kind of project that I did, I think, it was last year now, but working through the kind of the government guidance for employers about apprenticeships is, 120 something pages long, which is absolutely nuts, and obviously would put anyone off having to read through all of that. So I took the task on myself to try and filter it down into the key things that employers definitely need to know. And so we have that as a resource that we've created. So at the point people are quite committed, we would send that, and just answers the key questions about who's eligible and how the funding works, etc., etc. But really trying to, looking at it, a lot of it just kind of didn't need to be in there. So yeah, I think there's definitely more we can do, but that's just some of the examples of what we've done so far.
Again, to what echo what Emma's saying, a lot of the guidance is not in a digestible format. It is not possible for a organization where Emma said, we've got 92% organizations that are 1 to 10 in this country, in the UK, based on the CVS data. So, if you're looking at that 1 to 10, people playing multiple roles, and we fall into that category as well, because we are a small employer, we are also a small provider, to go through that guidance, 197 pages of it is not possible. It would be very, very off-putting. So, there's a compliance aspect, but if we want employers to take on and engage more with apprenticeships, I think it's got to be, it's got to really be driven. Some of it has to come from government, and they've got to simplify it. Of course, there are frameworks and there are parameters, because you can't simplify something too much. But I think it's, how do you form these hubs where people can get support, but also raising awareness. There are employers who don't want to talk about apprenticeships, or who don't even know about apprenticeships. Still, you kind of start having conversations with them, or they have a real misconception and about it, and they're like, oh no, it's too much hard work, I don't even want to have the conversation, and they just shut it out. So it's, how do we kind of raise that awareness? But it's got to come, I think, from government level, from policy level, where they're raising awareness. And I think this whole thing about unspent funds just going back to the Treasury, I have my own views on it, because I think that money should be used for training. I think those are for wider training. I think in Scotland you're allowed to use the funds for a wider range of training. So I think those are things that we really, really need to look at, because if skills are the issue, and skills lead to economic empowerment and growth of GDP and all of those things, then how do we kind of make it quite seamless to ensure that we are a knowledge economy and we keep growing in that direction?
Absolutely. So very interesting points from you both. Thank you for sharing. I think we'll move on to the next question, which is, what needs to change in order to support employers considering apprenticeships as a route for their talent pipeline?
Sorry to comment. Yeah, so sure. So gosh, it's a big question, and I think there are things that are already happening which are great that people need to kind of jump on the bandwagon with as well. So yeah, I mean, in terms of employers considering it, I think we are now seeing a lot more large employers engaging with it. It took a while it was actually 2017, the year that they introduced the levy, and it took a while of people kind of not acting very quickly, or kind of passing the baton in a way in some of these larger organizations in terms of what they were going to do with this apprenticeship levy. But I do think that tide is turning. I think in terms of what's being taught in schools as well, so in schools and colleges, people making those decisions about what their first career is going to be and what pathway they want to take, apprenticeships are getting a lot more of a platform than they have been in previous years. So I would encourage employers to jump on that bandwagon basically, and to start thinking about which roles are suited to apprenticeships. There's, in almost every department you can think of an apprenticeship role that would suit it, and whether they just take the leap and start advertising those vacancies as apprenticeships, maybe starting with a few, learning lessons, and then expanding it wider into other teams, I think is the best the best way to do it, especially for larger organizations. In terms of smaller organizations and SMEs, so yeah, that's a lot of the kind of support work that we do. And just to be very clear, we're London focused at the moment. I'm hoping to spread our support further than that in the future, but there are actually other apprenticeship hubs that deliver similar to support than what WorkWhile do, up and down the country in different areas. So we've got something called the Apprenticeship Hub Network, which is actually an informal network just with the other organizations that deliver similar work to us. And so I'd recommend having a look at that, or getting in touch with us, and we can point you in the right direction, even if you're not a London-based business. So there's lots that we can do to support people thinking about that as their talent pipeline. And I think the other thing to bear in mind is that universities are going through difficult times as well. And I think you can kind of see a lot of that in the news, and a lot of young people really thinking about it a lot more than previous generations, about whether it's the right route for them, whether they want the debt from it, which is obviously just increasing. Particularly in the cost of living crisis, it's something people have to think about a lot more. So my advice to employers would be to jump on the bandwagon of a lot of things that are already happening.
And I think, again, just to support Emma, yes, I think, I encourage employers to kind of, look at apprenticeships really as a way to grow their talent pipeline. But, I think, if they start looking at that more with receptiveness rather than fear, then it also gives them that long-term plan, long-term view of their own business, that, these are the areas I'm going to grow in. Let me start looking at apprenticeships to bridge some of these gaps. And I think, again, we've got to look at the aspect of bureaucracy, how we can simplify it. But again, WorkWhile and other organizations, similar organizations, are there to simplify the process. But yes, if we're looking at apprenticeships where they were in 2017 to where they're in 2024, it's two very different conversations. And I think the other thing I would say is that I know the standards are reviewed every 3 years, but I think in the digital space, 3 years is too long, unfortunately. And how do you kind of keep up with that momentum? Because I understand with other other sectors, or other occupational standards, it's fine. But I think with digital, 3 years all of a sudden is way too long, and it's a very resource intensive exercise. With the IFATE, so how do we kind of look at them being a bit more fluid with some of those aspects around the standard, so apprentices can get more more relevant skills. For example, this is a conversation we have all the time. Digital accessibility was launched in 2022, the level 4 standard. We started delivering, we were one of the first providers who are delivering it, and we do have the market share on that particular standard, because we've done a lot of work around development. But although AI is not part of that standard at all, it's mentioned nowhere in the standard, we've had to start thinking about how we can teach the accessibility consultants, because it's a 2-year standard in year 2, about adopting AI tools that will support with accessibility. And I think it's those kind of, I think some freedoms have to be given with those standards where they're concerned. That's, that's sort of my view. But I mean, we've got audience as well. If anybody wants to input, please do. I think Sunil, Ajay, if you guys have anything to add, it'd be great to hear your thoughts as well.
Absolutely. So for our guests, please remember that you can just pop your mic off and chip in to the conversation like Dimple mentioned, or feel free to put it in the chat. And one of us will have a look and shout out for you. But if nobody has any comments, we will move into the next question. Tell us about the changes in the apprenticeship and the policy landscape. Something I think that you touched on, Dimple. So
I think this is more for Emma. I think she's, but I think there are some changes happening in the landscape, but I'll sort of hand this over to Emma, because I think she's the expert on this one.
Oh, that's very kind. I'll try my best. So in terms of the changes that have happened most recently, the main ones I've touched on as part of my presentation. So the fact that levy paying organisations are now able to transfer up to 50%. So that was previously 25% of their unspent levy, which means that they could have 50% of it being spent internally on hiring apprentices, and then have the whole other half available to give to other businesses, which I don't think is being fully leveraged yet. Is announced very recently as part of the changes for the new financial year, so literally just the start of this month. So that's something that's, I think, going to have a bigger impact on the kind of work that we do as well. So also previously the apprenticeship training fully funded by the government, so not leading any levy transfer or co-investment, that was for apprentices aged 16 to 18. Now it's up for 16 to 21. So anyone 21 or younger, they can have their full training costs covered, which I hope will drive more starts in those younger age groups, which we're seeing less of sort of come through. I think the fact that people are potentially sometimes completing the university degrees or different kind of training and then going into apprenticeships, or they're taking apprenticeships on as part of their kind of career development changing sector. We're seeing those a lot older than that take on apprenticeships, kind of probably more so than in that 16 to 21 age category. So I think getting them really embedded with that generation who are literally making those decisions a very early career about what they want to do, I think is really key, and hopefully that policy will help to drive that. The only other thing to mention, which I hadn't before, is there are some financial incentives available to both apprentices and businesses. So for businesses, if they offer an apprenticeship to someone aged between 16 and 18, the business itself receives £1,000 from the government, which can obviously go quite a long way in helping with paying for maybe equipment or wages, or however the business wants to spend it. It's not dictated in any way. And there's also a £3,000 care leaver bursary. So this £3,000 goes to the care leaver themselves, so not the business, but the actual apprentice. If they take on an apprenticeship between the ages of 18 and 25, I believe it is, that they themselves receive that money to help them afford the travel or the food or whatever it is that they need to help them with that apprenticeship, which I am very passionate about. I'm part of something called the Moving On Up network, which is looking at how apprenticeships can benefit care leavers specifically, and we think it's a really great route into work for those from that background. So that's something that's been introduced to help boost that as well.
I think Dimple has a thought, but you're on mute, Dimple.
No, nothing. I just said thank you, Emma. Thanks for sharing that. Thank you.
Thank you indeed. Now, our final question for today is, what would the audience hear? So we're kind of egging you on to participate now. What would you like to see happen in order to be more engaged and involved in the process of apprenticeships? And so just a little bit of a prompt. Think about any particular barriers or misconceptions about apprenticeships that you feel need to be addressed. Anything about collaboration between employers, training providers, policymakers even. What could be improved to foster a more supportive apprenticeship ecosystem? Dev, AJ, Sunil, if you'd like to chip in, I mean, Rajiv and Flavio as well, we'd like to hear from you. Any thoughts?
Hi, everyone. I do have a very long list. I don't know if we'll have time for it, but I guess
We'll give it a go.
top three. Something that me and Emma seem to come across quite often is where businesses struggle to afford the wages or pay a fair wage. In the beginning, I probably would have pushed back on it, but as the years have gone by, I can definitely see the need for it. Some form of incentive to encourage some of those small business owners to actually, take on their first apprentice. Matter of fact, it would be their first employee, and if there is support towards that, that would be amazing. I guess the other part, something that Dimple kind of touched on, duration of apprenticeships. Within reason, we do have flexibility, but sometimes it could leave you with, excuse the expression, like egg on your face towards the end, because you don't know what's around the corner when somebody will challenge those decisions. So I guess duration of apprenticeships, some could do with shortening, but also a bit more flexibility around it. And I guess the third point, is probably a common one across the board. People talking about functional skills. We all say, especially for level 3 and above, you need to have sufficient levels of English and maths. For some individuals in society that have got on in life really well, probably hasn't, they never really did so well during their GCSEs. They've got on fine. Do they really need those qualifications to prove they can do those apprenticeships, or be eligible for those apprenticeships? So again, it's probably an aspect there as well. But yeah, top 3. I'll let someone else contribute.
Thank you so much, AJ. So would anybody else like to chip in with their top 3 or talk about what AJ's top 3 are? Any further inputs? I think we have a message in the chat. So it's just Rajiv giving everyone a nudge to post any questions to Dimple and Emma as well. So even if you have new questions, please post them in the chat. We're happy to read them out.
I think I do have something to add to what AJ said with functional skills. Yes, because, we've had situations where we've had senior managers who worked in the space of accessibility, but they've genuinely lost their certificates, but they have to do their maths and English. And they're like, we don't want to do maths and English. We're not going to do the apprenticeship. So what do? It kind of stops it. And I mean, that's a very, that's a completely different spectrum when you're looking at level 4s and 5s, especially. But I think, I think if I had to say the top 3, what AJ said, help small employers take on their first or second employee, because that will really support the economy and the business to grow. And you know what, it's a compound effect, really, because when you take on an apprentice, you see the value they add, they kind of move on to something better, but then you're able to take on and grow that provision and grow your organization with the individual you're taking on. And I think that I've seen it work. We've experienced it firsthand as well as an organization in previous lifetimes, but I think it works really, really well. But when you don't have the money to pay that £13.14, what do you do? How do you kind of manage and navigate that space as a business? So I think incentives for that to small employers, I think, would be really, really valuable, would be really beneficial. And lots of employers will take it on, because I think the reservation is always money. And I think the other thing is to consider functional skills, especially for slightly older apprentices who may have lost their certificate, but like AJ said, have gotten on really, really well in life. But I think, apprenticeships seem to be going in the right track since 2017. Before that, it was a completely different story. And I think it's to continue the good work and continue building on it, but also looking at where some of the bureaucracy can be taken away, where it can be simplified, and thinking about really the end stakeholders, which are the employers and the young apprentices themselves.
Thank you so much for that, Dimple. So we've had lots of good insights today. If nobody else has any comments or questions, we'll wrap it up here. So thank you.